In the fall of 1874, one of the greatest tragedies in the history of the Old West took place in the depths of Texas's Palo Duro Canyon. Over 1,000 horses captured from the Comanche tribe would be rounded up by the U.S. Army's 4th Cavalry and summarily wiped out at the order of their commanding officer, Colonel Ranald McKenzie. The loss of their horse herd would prove to be the tragic final blow to the Comanche in their fight to maintain their way of life. And it would leave a permanent blight on the legacy and the psyche of Colonel McKenzie. Tonight, join History at the OK Corral for the tragic, fascinating story of the Battle of Palo Duro Canyon.
Northern Texas, September 28, 1874, 5 a.m. In the eerie dark of the pre-dawn morning, the men of the U.S. Army's 4th Cavalry and their horses nervously peer down a nearly vertical embankment. Then, after a few tense moments, the riders dismount and lead their horses over the edge, the angle being so steep that the animals' hind legs nearly touch their stomachs. In the darkness, the men cannot even see the bottom of the embankment, but can only trust in the orders of their officers and resolve themselves to complete this seemingly impossible task. And, as every one of them well knows, this will be only the first of many such tasks that will be asked of them on this day. For they are under the command of one of the Army's most promising, most aggressive, and most demanding young leaders, Colonel Ranald MacKenzie. And McKenzie has been charged with completing a mission that has plagued the U.S. Army for decades, finding and defeating the Comanche. This has been made even more difficult by the fact that this band of Comanches they are searching for have joined forces with their longtime allies, the Kiowa, and their new allies, the Cheyenne and Arapahoe, in order to evade and resist McKenzie. And, finally, to make all of this even more complex, McKenzie would have to find them in the midst of the labyrinthian confines of Texas's massive Palo Duro Canyon. But after weeks of searching with his Tonkawa native scouts, McKenzie has finally located the village of the Comanche and their allies, and now he seeks to make his attack. Time is of the essence, and McKenzie drives his men hard. This is nothing new to them, as it is well known that their commander is not only a strict disciplinarian, but absolutely unrelenting in his pursuit of his enemy. Though his irascible reputation is well-accepted fact amongst his men, it is also well accepted that his bravery is indisputable. McKenzie, born to a prominent naval family that included legendary naval officer Commodore Matthew C. Perry, graduated first academically in his class at West Point. Graduating in 1862, his class was among the first newly minted officers to see combat in the Civil War. And, for his part, Ranald McKenzie saw some of the most violent, brutal fighting in the entirety of the war. He distinguished himself in some of the Civil War's deadliest battles, including the Second Battle of Bull Run, the Battle of Antietam, and the Battle of Gettysburg. By war's end, McKenzie would be seriously wounded a staggering 7 times. Now, nearly a decade later, his body bore testament to what he had endured, with his right hand being so severely mangled that the Comanche had taken to calling him Bad Hand. It was also increasingly rumored amongst his men and commanders alike that McKenzie's mind may also bear the scars of the horrors he had survived, as his behavior was becoming increasingly more volatile and erratic. Still, at this time, he is considered one of the most revered combat officers in the whole of the United States Army, and has been entrusted with this task of hunting down the Comanche and their allies for good reason, as there are few men more qualified for the job. After ascertaining the location of the Comanche camp, McKenzie has ordered an attack at first light. He knows, as do all of his men, that the element of surprise will be critical. If the Comanche and their allies detect their presence, they will simply meld into the canyon's infinite confines and carry on to fight another day. As far as McKenzie is concerned, this is a wholly unacceptable option. And thus, his men continue to pour down the impossibly steep incline before congregating at the bottom on the canyon floor. Many of them have found the descent more terrifying than any battle they have yet fought, and struggle to regain control of their nerves before the upcoming attack. Now, it is just before 6 a.m., and McKenzie's native scouts point out the direction of the village. This large village has gone undetected to virtually everyone but the Tonkawa scouts. However, it is only roughly 1 mile away. The soldiers continue to lead their horses over the rocky ground of the canyon floor, deliberately moving towards the village with the Tonkawa scouts leading the way. The trek is slow and cautious, and it is nearly 7 a.m. before the soldiers are within striking distance of the village. Even at this range, miraculously, the inhabitants of the village still have seemingly no idea that the cavalry is present. With every step closer to the village, McKenzie and his men are more and more heartened at the fact that they have managed to get so close, still completely unnoticed. Then, just as the sun begins to peek over the canyon walls, the sharp retort of barking dogs cuts through the morning air. The army soldiers have been discovered. Only a few short moments after the first dog begins to sound the alert to his masters, the entire village seemingly explodes into a fury of activity, with mothers and children bursting out of their lodges and running for the confines of the canyon. Now, McKenzie orders his men to mount a head-on attack into the village, hoping to strike when the Comanches and their allies are at their weakest. This village, McKenzie well knows, is under the leadership of some of the fiercest, most legendary chiefs of the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapahoe, ones that he has spent years pursuing, such as Lone Wolf, Poor Buffalo, and Quanah Parker. The warriors here will likely be more concerned with defending their families than mounting offensive attacks. But they are largely highly capable, very experienced warriors. The soldiers' best chance for success lies in striking the village hard and hitting it immediately. But as the men charge into the village, they are met by relatively few defenders, ones seemingly intent on creating a distraction for their escaping comrades more than mounting a serious defensive stand. This, however, does not diminish the ferocity of the soldiers' charge. And it especially does not affect those at the forefront of the attack, the Tonkawa scouts. The sight of the oncoming Tonkawa perhaps causes more terror in the hearts of the Comanche mothers than does that of the oncoming soldiers. In the decades-long intertribal warfare between the Comanche and the Tonkawa, there have been countless instances in which entire villages of both sides have been slaughtered. Thus, virtually every woman and child in the village now flees in terror, as their warriors still defending the village begin to fall. For all of the fighting spirit of the warriors on the canyon floor attempting to fight off the soldiers and scouts, they are quickly overrun. By 9 a.m., the fighting is over, and roughly 60 defenders lie dead on the ground. But the vast majority of the Comanche have managed to escape further into the canyon under the leadership of their chiefs. Quanah Parker, in particular, stands out as an unshakable leader during the Comanche's retreat, guiding his people to safety and away from the chaos and danger of the battle site. But for all of Quanah's vaunted leadership, he and his people face one seemingly intractable problem. They are all now on foot. The Comanche's entire way of life is based around the horse. They are perhaps the finest horsemen on the plains, and far and away the richest tribe in terms of pure horse flesh. But now, virtually the entirety of their 1,000-plus head of horses lie under the control of Colonel Ranald McKenzie and the 4th Cavalry. And while it might seem that the sudden influx of such a number of horses would be an unmitigated blessing to an Army cavalry officer, the newly gotten horse herd presents a sizable problem. McKenzie's forces number roughly 400 men, with feed and supplies for several hundred horses, but no more. Thus, taking the entire herd with them would be virtually impossible. Turning them loose would also be a problem, as most would likely soon be recaptured by the Comanche. This would instantly negate any advantage McKenzie had just gained, and again make the Comanche and their allies a viable threat across the southern plains. But in the midst of such a dilemma, McKenzie sees great possibility. No force in Army history has been in such a position to issue such a devastating blow to the Comanche by depriving them of their most critical resource. And so, he issues a command that will haunt his legacy forever. He orders that the troopers select a small number, estimates range from 300 to 400, of the best, most suitable horses for cavalry use. Then, he orders the rest, over 1,000 horses, to be shot. For the following hours, nearly until sundown, the cavalry soldiers herd the horses into smaller ravines branching off from the main canyon and summarily annihilate them. Many of the men find themselves deeply horrified by the order, and contemporary accounts gravely remark on haunting memories of gunfire and horse screams echoing about the canyon walls in a macabre symphony. By nightfall, the deed is done, and McKenzie, for his part, seems pleased that his orders have been carried out. It seems now, to the veteran officer, that the days of the Comanche and their allies on the open plains are numbered. He knows that without their horses, they will be all but helpless. But the Comanche will not surrender immediately. Under Quanah Parker's leadership, they will flee even further into the confines of the canyon, evading Army incursions throughout the fall. But the coming winter of 1874 to 1875 would prove to be one of the harshest in decades, and little by little, many Comanche trickled into the nearest fort, Fort Sill, in order to simply survive. In fact, it would not be until the summer of 1875 that Quanah Parker would lead his band of the final remaining holdouts into Fort Sill, officially surrendering to U.S. Army forces and resigning themselves to life on the reservation. However, while this new lifestyle was devastating to many of the Comanche and to other Plains tribes, Quanah Parker, himself the half-white child of a revered Comanche chief, would adapt well and largely thrive in his new life. He would work for the equitable treatment of his tribe, become a successful businessman, and the owner of an expansive homestead in Oklahoma known as Star House, where he would host such esteemed guests as Geronimo and Teddy Roosevelt. He would become a transitional figure, a warrior of the plains who was now the proud owner of a 1900s luxury car. He would ultimately die in 1911 at the age of 62, his life becoming the stuff of Old West legend. Sadly, for Colonel Ranald MacKenzie, he would meet a far different end. After his exploits in the Palo Duro Canyon, his already formidable reputation quickly rose to him being considered the finest field officer on the entirety of the American frontier. In 1876 to 1877, he would be called north by the Army to combat the Utes and the Lakotas in other successful campaigns. And by 1882, he was held in such high esteem that he was promoted to brigadier general at the age of 42, making him one of the youngest men to ever hold the rank. He was then given command of the entire jurisdiction of Texas, a massive responsibility, and a clear indication of the faith which his commanding officers had in him. However, by the early 1880s, his symptoms of physical and mental decline were also becoming more and more evident. In addition to his numerous wounds suffered throughout the Civil War, he had also suffered several concussions while in service on the frontier. By 1883 and into 1884, his condition was beginning to severely affect his job performance. Incidents of his issuing contradictory orders, suffering violent mood swings, and being unable to focus and then falling into periods of paranoia and despair were reported by several contemporary sources, and by mid-1884, McKenzie was officially declared unfit to serve and forced into retirement. Varying accounts point to the root cause being epilepsy, brain damage, or perhaps deterioration from a long-suffering syphilis infection. Whatever the cause, after his discharge, McKenzie was brought home to New York by his family and placed into an asylum on Staten Island, New York. Here, he would spend his final years falling into a state of deeper and deeper disconnection from reality before finally passing away in 1889 at the age of only 48, with the cause of death being listed as dementia. McKenzie would be laid to rest in the West Point Cemetery, fittingly interred where his journey had begun. Ranald MacKenzie presents one of the most complex, ruthless, and tragic figures in the history of the Old West, one whose impact on history is rivaled by few others. But for all of his military accomplishments, it is his ordering of the slaughter of the horses at Palo Duro Canyon that has left the most indelible mark on his legacy. It also deeply influenced Comanche culture, viewed even today as a great tragedy not only physically, but spiritually, as the horse is held in great reverence by the culture who depended on it so greatly for their survival. Depending on who you ask, the tragedy may have left an indelible mark on the location of the village itself, as many accounts claim the hoofbeats and whinnies of the massacred herd can still be heard on quiet nights even today. However, no matter how horrifying, this story is but one instance of the inhumanity and brutality that riddle the history of the Red River War. The accounts of brutal combat between the U.S. Army and the Comanche, the Kiowa, the Cheyenne, and the Arapahoe are virtually endless, and all deserve their own episode. But for tonight, those are other stories for other times. Thank you for joining us on this episode of History at the OK Corral. If you like this story, click on one of the videos on your screen now to watch more. Also, if you'd like to learn more about Old West history, be sure to sign up for the HOKC newsletter. Link is in the description below. Thank you again for watching, and we'll see you next time on History at the OK Corral, home of history's greatest shootouts and showdowns.